Hey guys, what is up? It's your boy Swimmy Strim, and today I wanted to make a video about why you should consider running more than 40 cards in your artifact deck, a rule that defies one of the most prominent deck building fundamentals in every other card game out there. Actually might make a lot of sense in Artifact, and kind of how to identify these decks where you might want to run more than 40 cards, some of the pros and cons in doing so. I think one thing that's really important to note is you're not only looking at the mana cost of these cards in question, right? Because, obviously one of the fundamentals of mana-based card games is you want to have this idea of kind of playing on this curve. You want to balance your, low-cost cards with your high-cost cards, and if your signatures are forcing high-cost cards in your deck, you have no choice but to dilute that at least a little bit with some lower-cost cards that you are adding in to just reduce the odds of drawing these too early, right? The other factor apart from mana cost on these cards is that fairly often a lot of signature cards in the game are kind of situational to the point where you don't really even want to be running it as a 3 of slot, right? And I gotta say, this is not theory crafting in a video. This is actually something that a lot of the best deck builders in the game are already doing. Okay, so quick preface. In normal card games, the reason you want to be running the minimum amount of cards possible is typically because you want to increase the consistency of drawing not only your kind of most high power cards, but also the ones that are most crucial to your strategy, right? The high synergy cards for whatever, combo or strategy you plan to be playing, right? You don't really gain anything by adding more than the minimum required amount. In fact, you're only just lowering consistency of the deck. In Artifact, this is not necessarily true, and that's due to a few factors, but most predominantly the advent of the hero signature cards and kind of how these are implemented into the deck building process. So in Artifact, of course, you've got 5 heroes. This means 15 signature cards because each signature is a 3 of that you can't actually control, and this is really important. This gives deck building in Artifact a bit of a framework of rigidity, right? Because you have maybe heroes that you need to run because of their powerful stat lines or powerful actives or passives, but maybe their signature card is something that you either don't want to be running a lot of, or maybe you just don't really want to be running that many cards of that mana cost. I'm going to give you boys an example. So this is the 43 card list that was made by Hoy and brought by Sixo in the Seat Story Cup group stage. So this is kind of like an aggro payday list, and the most interesting thing about it to, a lot of players that are coming from these other card games is, why is this list run 43 cards? Isn't it insane to run more than the minimum amount of cards? Normally, the answer would be yes, but kind of the idea in this list is somewhat twofold. The most important thing is that Axe and Phantom Assassin are very important towards the idea of this deck. Not only are you trying to push face damage as early as possible, but you want to be killing heroes to generate your kind of payday game plan. So their high stats are necessary with the idea of this deck. That being said, these 2 heroes being in your deck will jam 6 copies of an expensive 6 mana kind of finisher, 3 Berserker's Call and 3 Coup de Grace into your deck. Right? And if you've played these aggro style decks before, you'll actually be familiar with how often your opening hand will have something like 2 copies or maybe even 3 copies of these cards in it. And that feels extremely bad when it happens. So, interestingly enough, in Artifact, in this example, you've got this, 43 card list, and you need these extra 3 cards, give or take, to be able to sort of dilute the impact that these forced signatures have on you. When you look at these signature cards, them being kind of like these late game expensive tools, right? You've got something like Mystic Flare on Scarith. Let's talk about Aphotic Shield actually for Abaddon, right? Now this card is kind of rendered fairly non-competitive even before the advent of Jasper Daggers, but let's talk about it from a design standpoint regardless, right? So if ever you needed a purge in the meta, excluding the option for Jasper Daggers, maybe Abaddon is kind of something you turn to, but even as a tech option, this isn't the kind of card you want to run as a 3 of, right? But because this hero will force 3 of it into your deck, you're kind of forced to improvise, right? So you have a lot of these designs on signature cards. You know, Berserker's Call is very powerful. Maybe you're happy running it as a 3 of, but only if your mana curve will kind of allow it. Maybe in a lot of decks it kind of might equalize to a 2 of slot, right? Coup is definitely like not really 3 of material in a lot of these kind of aggro decks, and you do kind of want to trim down on your ratioing on being able to draw them. The only way to do this is by diluting the odds of drawing them. And there's other deck builders that are doing this as well. Stan Sifka and his, I believe, roommate, I think they're still roommates, Andrzej Stratsky or Honey. They also were experimenting with this idea of like running 41 or 42 cards in their version of Red Black, which wasn't even like as aggro, right? So people are already doing this, and the real question you have to ask yourself is, you know, it's just important to kind of free up this mentality as a deck builder, right? Because, you know, all of us coming from other card games have just like this super ingrained idea of just, you know, don't go over 40, or, you know, don't go over the maximum or sorry, the minimum amount for whatever game you come from, right? But in Artifact, it really makes you ask the question, do you actually want to, right? And the first thing to look for is, you know, balancing out your cards, balancing out your curve. And if it's a deck that requires just so much consistency that it maybe doesn't allow for it at all. For example, something like a red-green ramp deck that uses, you know, Stars Align and Time of Triumph, you don't want to go over 40 cards in a deck like that because you are so needing consistency early, right? You need to be drawing your cards at the right turns, specifically like turn 2, turn 3 even, that, I mean, there's no way in a deck like that you can go over 40 cards. But in a lot of other decks where you are looking to lower your curve, you should definitely keep the option in mind, because a lot of these heroes are going to be worth running if you can kind of balance out their downside by jamming a few more cards into your deck. Let's take a look at another example. This is my 44 card mono blue list, which you might have seen the guide for on this channel. And basically the idea with this list is it's kind of using the same sort of mentality, right? Which is you've got these heavy signature cards that you kind of need. I mean, these are powerful and they're your game enders, right? You've got your Eclipses on of Luna, you've got your Thunder God's Wrath off of Zeus, you've got your Mystic Flare off of Skywrath, and then you've even got some additional, you know, big finishers like even the Bolt of Damocles in the list, right? These are not cards you want to be drawing early, but you do kind of need them in your deck, right? Maybe if you had control over these, you could see running these as, you know, less than 3 ofs in your deck. But these are kind of powerful heroes that kind of, you know, especially when you're playing a mono deck, you don't really have as much choice of what heroes you're actually playing. So you're kind of forced into these, and, you know, by nature of that, especially with the Earthshaker version, which I'm not even using, but I mean, Echo Slam is kind of the perfect example of this. It's not really a card you want to be drawing into usually. But because of that, you're kind of forced to dilute your odds of drawing these early. At this point, I think basically everybody who's playing mono blue at a high level is running more than 40 cards. I've talked over it with Hoy and Hyped, Gara. Everyone is kind of on this like above 40 card train, but people are still kind of having different preferences in terms of how many cards they want to run. But another idea from this list, which is really, really important, is this idea of these cycle cards that blue has access to, these Cunning Plans and Compels, being so powerful in the early game that they are basically completely uncuttable, right? And earlier versions of mono blue were cutting these. They were running something like 2 Cunning Plans and no Compels, or, you know, 2 Compels and 1 Cunning Plan. They weren't running 6 of in this slot, but they're honestly extremely strong, just due to the nature of you having a lot of mana in the early game available to cycle with, and the multicast ability from Ogre, even the static field from Zeus means these cards, when you draw them early, you know, instead of drawing your late big mana drops, you feel much better about your, you know, potential to win the game. Anyway, that's it for me. I just wanted to make this quick video because this is a question I've been getting asked a ton over the last week, and I think it's really interesting. Artifact is a game that, you know, pushes deck building in kind of new and unexplored directions, just because it has such an intricate concept on deck building, right? There's like hero item deck idea, and there's a lot you can play around with deck building in Artifact, and this is something that every deck builder should consider. Anyway, see you guys next time.